Hi, my name is Adam, and the next topic we'll be learning about is the influence of a company's management on analysis and analyst biases in conducting research. How a company presents its information becomes inherently important because of the effect it has on an external analysis. The first factor that affects company management is behavior biases. These are cognitive errors or emotional biases that affect the company's ability to present unbiased and transparent information. There are four main cognitive biases. These are framing, anchoring, adjustment, and availability. Framing occurs when the same problem is assessed differently depending on how the information or questions was presented. For example, a salesperson would rather claim 85% customer satisfaction than admit 15% were dissatisfied. Anchoring is when the framework for interpreting and analyzing the available information can be influenced disproportionately by an initial default position or anchor. One example is if you were in a store and saw a t-shirt that cost $1,200 and a second shirt for $100, you would see the second shirt as cheap. Adjustment is a bias connected to anchoring when the anchor tends to insufficiently incorporate new information and new information is perceived through a warped lens. Lastly, availability is a cognitive bias that involves individuals giving undue weight to more accessible, readily recalled information. An example would be seeing lots of coverage on the news of plane crashes tends to create fear of flying because the information is recalled easily the next time that we are flying. In this next slide, we can see an example of a company using framing bias in its annual report. In this report analysis, we can see the selection of words the chairman used when creating his report. Note the large use of positive words instead of negative words to create an excessively optimistic impression for the analyst. This can influence the analyst through optimism from overconfidence and give an illusion of control from the company when that is simply not the case. This illusion of control and optimism can also be reinforced through companies presenting recalculated earnings. Management may believe poor earnings are only temporarily or artificially depressed and recalculate outside accounting practice to give a more favorable position in the reports. Now that we know how analysts can be affected by cognitive bias, it's time to learn how they can combat this by maintaining a disciplined and systematic approach. There are two factors that we must focus on to improve our remedial actions. The first is the forecast accuracy and consistency of approach. We can see in this diagram this can be done by focusing on metrics and comparable data, rather than descriptive or unverifiable data. Secondly is the calibration of likely accuracy. This is improved in three ways: framing the issue appropriately, gathering information, and recognizing the underlying base rates. See, there are plenty of biases in company management, but we must also consider the biases in analysts when conducting research on the company. There are two factors to note and three biases when analysts conduct research. The two factors are emotional responses and the search process. The three biases are confirmation bias, the gambler's fallacy, and the representativeness bias. Starting with the two factors, emotional responses is a large factor when processing real-time financial information. Emotions can affect how we process information rationally because they can improve or disrupt our decision making. This can also cause assets to be endowed with additional value based on the emotional response to them. Financially sound companies may be associated with good or safe characteristics, even though the external economic environment or the high stock price can make it risky. The search process is important for collecting information because for an analyst to be successful, they must find the optimal stopping point in their search, as it may not be clear, and it is possible to collect too much information, which can lead to unstructured information and false illusions of knowledge and control. Next, we can see the three biases. Confirmation bias is a cognitive bias when there is a tendency for people to misread evidence as additional support for an initial hypothesis. This can be a form of resolving and the tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms the analyst's prior beliefs. This information may not be analyzed properly, but may still make the judgment or forecast more likely from its points. This can also involve the conjunction fallacy, which is the probability of two independent events occurring in conjunction is never greater than the probability of either occurring alone. The gambler's fallacy is a misunderstanding of probabilities where people wrongly project reversal to a long-term mean. Investment professionals and strategists are affected because it reflects a false understanding of the behavior of random events. With this effect, analysts may expect a pattern that has diverged from the long-term average to reverse within a specific period. A common fallacy related to this is the hot hand fallacy. This is the tendency to believe that a successful streak is likely to lead to further success. Representativeness bias occurs when we jump to conclusions based on how representative the case is. This can be seen in a study where it is suggested that analysts are biased towards favoring growth over value. The tendency of analysts to recommend high growth and low yield stocks usually happens because of failure to recognize the base rate or effect of the environment that the company operates in. With the biases and effects that occur to analysts in conducting research, this next slide will focus on the remedial actions to minimize these effects. There are 5 main steps analysts follow to avoid biases in conducting research as seen in this slide. The first step is to collect information in a systematic way. This is a strategy to help combat emotional biases that are difficult to deal with. To do this, an analyst must collect information using proper metrics and ratios that allow comparability. This allows analysts to compare with previous calculations and benchmarks against current similar calculations. A proper systematic approach also involves using prepared questions, and information gathering should always be finished before the analysis is done and the conclusion is finished. The second step, assigning probabilities, uses underlying base rates to help the issue an outcome assumption. We often fail to assume that some outcomes are either impossible or certain, and using base rates, we can use this to properly understand these unlikely scenarios. Third, we have considered the search process. This involves considering the limits of information and the context of information. Using a proper search process helps analysts avoid search biases that may alter their conclusion. A proper search process involves finding unbiased facts and opinions that give clear, unambiguous forecasts. Our fourth step is incorporating evidence sequentially. This is a result of using a proper search process and helps adoption of new forecasts and ensures a proper structure. Lastly, the prompt feedback step allows reevaluation and helps analysts gain information that can only be gathered in the future.